I think many of us have heard this phrase before, and we all wonder what it means. Either it seems so obvious to, of course, know oneself, and that everyone really knows themselves, or it seems so obscure that we don't really understand what it means. We think, well, I know who I am. I have a memory. I know my name. I know where I'm from. I know where I live. All these things. Of course, I know myself. But that's not at all what goes on behind the phrase. And it was held in such high regard by the ancient Greek philosophers and the culture and the people that it was actually put on the monument to Apollo, the god, for everyone to see, right at the entrance. All that it would say was, "Know thyself." And I thought I would dive into that a little bit to get behind it, to see the true meaning in it, which is more than just a simple command or a suggestion. It itself contains all the wisdom that a human being will ever need. And I'm recording this. Today's about 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. I just thought we need to think about this particular thing, especially during this time of year. So I thought I'd try to get a video out to you guys before the day really starts. And like I said, this was inscribed to the monument, big monument in ancient Greece, to Apollo, for all to pass in front of him, to be reminded of, and perhaps to ask the same question as we do now. What's that supposed to mean? But everything that it points to, timeless and universal truths. And I'll demonstrate that to you by one example. About as far as you can get from ancient Greece, especially at that time, not only geographically, but sort of course, in culture, in history, is the East, where Hinduism was practiced. And in Hinduism, about the same time, and of course forever since, there's been the same beautiful thought. And it was expressed, again, as an example, around the same time in the holy scriptures of Hinduism as, "Know that by the knowing of which all things are known. Know that by the knowing of which all things are known." And the ancient Greeks' expression of "know thyself" is almost an answer to that. Because when one asks, well, what is that by the knowing of which all things are known? It's thyself. Once you know yourself, you know that by the knowing of which all things are known. That's how significant these things are. That's how big the things they're pointing to are. To know thyself really is the most important thing, and the best thing, and the most divine thing, as well as the most human thing, and all around the highest, most amazing thing that you can ever do in your life is to know thyself. And okay, again, what does that mean? Philosophy, I think wisdom, is not to find a solution to contradictions, but to dissolve the mind that sees contradictions. Now, where I'm going with that is, when I've experienced in myself and everything that I've studied and everything that I've seen in my own journey, so to speak, of getting to know myself, I realized to know thyself is to not become more familiar with yourself, but to become increasingly less familiar with yourself. And here again is that seeming contradiction, that seeming paradox, at which point many people arrive. They say, of course I want to know myself. Of course I want to be comfortable with myself. Of course I want to not feel like a stranger to myself, as we all do sometimes, right? So I'm just going to explore my mind more. And they might go to therapy, or they might just be more conscious of who they are. They might start defining themselves more. They might think they have to make their minds up on so many more issues that they were previously confused about, skeptical about, unsure about. And so people end up defining themselves more and more to know themselves more and more. But that's the exact opposite direction that we need to go. To define ourselves, to give ourselves more identities, is exactly the wrong way. To know thyself is to know this. Whenever you have this feeling, I'm sure at some point in your life, you thought that something in the external world was part of your identity, part of who you are. Maybe this was a person, or a job, or a place you used to live. And then this person, for one reason or another, stops to exist in your life. Either they leave or whatever happens. This job, you leave the job. This place you used to live in, you leave that. And all of a sudden you realize that they're not part of your identity anymore, either because they left or because you dropped them. And what's more freeing than that? Try to remember that feeling. When you thought something was your identity and it was part of you, and you had to keep feeding it, keep upholding it, try to keep it alive. You had a sense of obligation, a sense of duty to do things, to be a good such and such. This might be a good partner in a relationship, a good whatever job position, a good, if you identify with your nationality, your city, or whatever, a good citizen. Once you drop that, you realize you don't have to service that anymore. You don't have to be that identity anymore and do all the things that are required to be a good such and such. And it's the most freeing thing. You realize, even though I am less now, right? Because I used to be this thing and now that's gone, so I am somehow less. But really, in reality, it feels like I am more. I am freer. I am better. I am more myself. Marcus Aurelius, our friend, the Roman philosopher, Stoic emperor, said, "Today I escaped of all bothering circumstances, or rather, I threw them out." Now, why did he write it like that? Why did he say it like that? Could he not have gone back and corrected himself? Of course he could have. Why didn't he just say, "Today I threw out all bothering circumstances"? Because he wanted to make it more clear that the bothering circumstances in our lives are not things that we need to service, that we need to escape, evade, get out of the way of, but to throw them out, meaning an active process rather than a passive one. Something, not let things happen to us, but to do things to them, to throw them out. And I want you to know this. I want you to think about this. In all that I've learned, I've seen that the universe requires nothing of you. The universe requires nothing of you. All these obligations that you think you have, all these requirements that weigh on you, all these things that need to be serviced every day because someone tells you to, because it's always been that way, because you've always been that way. All of it, and I mean all of it, is self-imposed. None of it is required. And actually, that's great news. This doesn't mean that you should do anything differently. Not necessarily. Free yourself of all the things you thought you had to be, and all the requirements and obligations and worries and problems and work that comes with it. If you were only doing it out of a sense of obligation, you do not have to do anything. You get to do them. Everything that you do, whether you look at it as an obligation, as a negative or a positive, is not required, and you get to do it. So if it is your privilege to do these things, why would you do things that you resent? Why would you do things that you never really wanted to do? And again, you're going to say, because I feel like it's my duty. But that's exactly what the point is. It's not. It's something that is demanded of you by some identity that you've built up, or that was handed to you and that you've been servicing for your whole life. So to know thyself is not to become more familiar with yourself, but to become less familiar, to drop identities, to drop whatever your sense of self was constituted of. To know thyself is to become aware of your human privilege, of not being required to do anything, but to be able to do and allowed to do almost anything you want. If you have a job and you're helping people through it, and you do a lot of big things, you get to do that. You don't have to do that. If it's not for you, if it doesn't satisfy you, leave. Don't stay there. And if you want to stay, stay because of your privilege to get to do it, not of your obligation to have to do it. Another thing, especially the ancient Greeks will say about knowing yourself, is to know exactly about this human nature, that you have a rational mind. And to have a rational mind is a uniquely human thing. Animals are largely driven by impulse. Their behaviors are mostly encoded within their DNA, within their bodies. Whereas we, because of evolutionary circumstances, we don't have as much instinct, which is evolutionarily a good and a bad. Of course, the good has been exactly this rational mind. And again here, rational mind does not mean a logical, mathematical mind where everything leads to the next step and to its logical conclusion. Not necessarily. The rational mind is a mind that operates without prejudice, without anger, without resentment, without hate. Do you see how, as I'm describing the rational human, I say, I don't give you a long list of things that this person is, but a list of things that this person is not. So to know yourself again, almost paradoxically it seems, is to know the things that you are not, that you are not obligated, that you are not required to do things, that you should not be hateful, not be resentful, not be prejudiced. All these things, not to be. So to know who you are, comes from knowing who you are not, whom you should not be. Your human nature does not require any of that. All that anger, that resentment, that misery, that jealousy, all of it comes from identities that you have built up for yourself that are, like I just said, self-imposed, not required at all by the universe, by that very thing which gave you your life in the first place. Your hundreds of thousands and millions of years of evolution. None of that told you that you had to have this splendid career, that you had to be this partner to some person, to some particular type of person who's successful and good looking, has a high standing in society, etc., all these things. Fill in the blanks. None of that is required. All of it is self-imposed. And again, don't take the wrong message from that. This doesn't mean that we should be sitting around all day doing nothing because nothing is required of us. Like I mentioned earlier, we can do all the things that we did up until now, and even more. The crucial difference is to do them not to satisfy, to service some sense of identity, to do them because we feel that we have the obligation to do them, but for the reason that we get to do them in our beautiful, short, but very meaningful human lives. I get to walk this earth. I get to go do something in society that I think is meaningful and helpful to others. I get to make money to live my life and to do the things that I think are important. I get to be with the people in my life. I don't have to be. I get to take a walk every day. The difference between a person who takes a walk because a doctor told them to, just because of their health, and the difference and the person who gets to take a walk, regardless of if they also need it for medical reasons or not. These two outlooks, while doing the same thing at the same time, at the same place, perhaps even, are entirely different. And the person who supposedly knows themselves because of all the identities that they have identified and described to themselves, and the person who knows all the things that they're not. It's a difference of night and day. None of your worries, none of your miseries, your entire story of your life in which you think you are the victim of, and all these bad things that have happened to you. Yes, they have happened, but they do not need to define you. Okay? Yes, they did happen. People were unfair to you. People have wronged you. People have abused you. Yes, that did happen. No one's denying that. But it doesn't have to define you for the rest of your life. The universe requires nothing of you. And you would do well to know that, by the knowing of which all things are known. Thyself.